Hello guys, welcome to the Introduction to Research in Educational Science. In this video, we'll discuss about the sampling method, especially unbiased and biased sampling method. Sampling is really important for your research, so you need to understand about what types of sampling method that you can use. Sample is you select a sample among the population, and the population is the entire group that you want to draw conclusions about. But since it's impossible to reach out to all the populations and collect the data from them, we need to pick certain sample. The sample is a specific group of individuals that you will collect the data from. And in general, there are two sampling methods named probability sampling and non-probability sampling method. The first one involves random selection, allowing you to make statistical inferences about the whole group. And the second one involves non-random selection based on convenience or other criteria, cost efficacy, or time efficacy, allowing you to easily collect the initial data. But also, depending on the type of the research, such as quantitative or the qualitative, you can use between the probability or non-probability sampling method. In general, if you are conducting the quantitative method, it is more recommended to use the probability sampling. And if we are using the qualitative research method, then the non-probability sampling may be more preferred. For the probability sampling method, there are lots of, but I will introduce you four types of the probability sampling method. The first one is simple random sample method. In this method, every member of the population have equal chance to participate in your research. To conduct the simple random sample method, we usually use the random number generator. You can use Excel easily to generate a number. So for instance, if your target group is the degree student at the UEF, there are about 25,000 students. So it's really hard to collect the data from all of them. So you put all the names of the students in order from 1 to 25,000 and use the random number generator and pick them based on the generated number, like a 1, 2, 700,000, like that. On the other hand, in the systematic sampling method, instead of using the number generator, you can use the intervals. For instance, if you pick the intervals 3, then among the 25,000 UEF students, you pick the first one and the fourth one and seventh one, like 10th one, like that. So you skip certain numbers and pick the number based on the interval that you choose. And the third technique is stratified sampling method. In this case, you divide the group into subgroups, but there must be some important reason. For instance, gender is common reason that people divided the whole sample into the subgroup. Or another example is the immigrant background. So someone who has the immigrant background and someone is a native, we divide it into the group into two so that every population with the different characters could be participate in the research. The last one is a cluster sampling method. Um, in this method, we put the individuals into the cluster. So instead of pick the individual sample, we pick the cluster randomly. For instance, if there are 100 schools at the UNC area, you put the school in order from 1 to 100 and use the simple random sample method to collect to make the decision to pick the school from 1 to 100. And when the school were selected, then you collect the data from whole cluster. But still, you can collect the data using the simple random sample method from the cluster. But the difference is that the cluster sampling method, we are interested in certain cluster uh, of the population, and it also is used in the educational larger scale study. But as an individual researcher, it's really hard to collect the data that represented the population. So in the case, we can use the secondary data that has been already collected from the large institutions like OECD or national educational institution. One example is the PISA, Program for International Student Assessment. So if we are interested in the student data, you can use the PISA or TIMSS. The PISA is a triennial international survey conducted every 3 years, and the target sample is 15-year-old students who are completing their lower secondary um, or middle school degree, let's say, and they measure their achievement in reading, mathematics, and science. But not only that, they also measure about their non-cognitive outcomes like interest in mathematics and science, or their efficacy, or their aspiration for future careers. But these days, they are more interested in about the student well-being at school, their happiness, and the bullying experiences. So those kind of data are there too. So if you are interested in these kind of topics, you can use the PISA data. I think these days, more than 70 countries participate in. So there are large possibility to conduct the research as an individual researcher if you use this one. Another example is a TALIS. The target populations are teacher and principal among I think the more than 50 countries as well. So it has been conducted every 5 years since 2005. So it already have the 3 cycles of the data. And the target is the lower secondary education teachers and school leaders. But individual countries have different education systems. So there are some varies about the definition of the lower secondary school, but usually it's secondary, lower secondary, like which means the middle school or the grade 7 to the 9th. And the teachers and the leaders of the school answers the questionnaire about their instructional practice, school climate, and their job satisfactions. And in my case, I have interested in their initial motivation to become a teacher and how it affects to their instructional practice, usually the student-centered method. So I have used this data for my research as well. The second sampling method is a non-probability or biased sampling method, and I will introduce 4 types of non-probability sampling method named convenience sampling, voluntary response sampling, purposive sampling, and snowball sample. And I think the name itself gives some characteristic of this sampling method. The first one is a convenience sampling method. It's The researcher used this sampling method based on the convenience, like an easy access. So for instance, if you want to conduct a research about the international student experience at the UEF, in the case, instead of conduct the research targeting whole international student at the UEF, you try to get the questionnaire from your classmates that are easily accessed and you're already familiar with. So in the case, you can call it as a convenience sampling method. And the second type of the non-probability sampling method is voluntary response sampling method. And it usually used on the internet site. Uh, for instance, if you have the same purpose that you have interest in the international student experience at the UEF, but instead of approach to the individuals, you just post this research on the Facebook group website where the international students easily visit and ask them to voluntarily participate to your research. So in this case, you call it as voluntary response sampling, but it's really biased in terms of the selecting the sample because usually the participants who participate in the voluntary response sampling, they already have high interest in those topics. So most of them were included in the research, but for those who does not have any interest in the topic, and or for those who does not have access to the topic, may be excluded. So it's biased. The third type of the sampling, the non-probability sampling, is purposive sampling method. And it's usually used for the qualitative research with a specific purpose. With the same topic, you have interest in the international student experience at the UF, but not whole international student, but you're interested in the student who are from eastern part of Asia, female with Christian backgrounds, like that. There must be a specific purpose of your research and why you need to pick the sample of them, but not like a convenience or voluntary response sampling. It has a specific purpose that I think the sample maybe just few. So you probably need to conduct a qualitative research method. And the last one is a snowball sampling method. So the individual researcher contact with the few numbers of the participant and ask them to introduce the researcher another participant. So the number of the participant increase like a snowball. One example at the UF master degree program is that there was a researcher, the master degree student who want to conduct a research about foreign parents' language principle to their children living abroad in Finland. Uh, but it's really hard to access to the target sample. So first she approached to the international student who came here with their family having kids, and she asked them to participate in her research. And after completing the questionnaire, she also asked them to introduce her other families that they knew as of living here as a foreigners, and they introduced her another family and so on. So in the end, there from two families, there were about 30 families who were participating in the study, so she could successfully complete her master's degree here at the UEF. So this is called as a snowball sampling. And this non-probability sampling is, I think, the mostly used for the master's degree student because of the easy access and the time and cost efficacies. So today we discussed about the probability and non-probability sampling method, and there are different kinds of benefits between these two sampling method, and there are different types of the sampling method as well. So in order to conduct the research, please think about what kind of purpose you have and who will be your target. Then think about what kind of sampling method you need to use to justify your result. Thank you.